Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, FinTech, Virtual FinTech Forum, for inviting us to talk about a very interesting topic called how RegTech is transforming governance in financial services. Now, before I start introducing the rest of the panel, I think I'll introduce myself first. My name is Chai Kit, and I am currently the chair of the RegTech subcommittee of Singapore FinTech Association. Now, as a day job, I actually run a RegTech company called Synopsis Solutions, providing AML KYC software to our clients, both in the financial as well as the non-financial services sector. So I'm very honored that I'm joined by a number of very great people here, experienced people, having come from the banking and financial services sector, as well as people who are actually running companies like myself, RegTech companies. So without further ado, I will very, very quickly introduce our panelists. Then I'll give a very high-level description about the topics and what we hope to achieve with this conversation, and then we'll get on with the panel for the next 40 or 45 minutes, subject to whether or not there's any question from the floor. Right, we have got Ms. Una van der Berg, Managing Director and Founder of VRS, Virtual Risk Solutions. And we have got Mr. Nelson Chan, Head of Financial Services, Business Development, Amazon Web Services. Ankit Ratan, CEO and co-founder of Scienzy, and last but not least, Amit Goel, Country Head, India Vice President, Global Advisory from Proof. Maybe, Una, you want to spend 1 minute or so to introduce yourself a little bit more, and then we can go to the other panelists for their respective introduction.
That's lovely.
Una.
Thank you so much for having us today, and thank you for such a kind introduction. So I don't think there's really much more to say. My name is Una, and I founded last year a global consultancy firm, Virtual Risk Solutions. And what we do is we look to support industry players, whether that's financial institutions, regulatory bodies, to understand what they can get out of implementing RegTech and FinTech solutions, and how in particular that can be implemented and made bespoke to their existing control models, which I suppose is one of the biggest challenges we're going to discuss here today.
Yeah, right. Nelson?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Nelson Chan. I lead the financial services vertical for AWS across Hong Kong and Taiwan. So AWS provides cloud computing services to financial institutions, all the way through to the smallest fintech startups. So a number of them will run or build RegTech solutions on AWS. And I joined AWS myself because I have a background in digital transformation in financial services. And so now I get to work closely with our customers of all shapes and sizes to help them through their transformation journey. And RegTech is a hot topic amongst them today.
Great. Ankit?
Yeah, hi everyone. This is Ankit. I'm co-founder of Scienzy, which is a 5-year-old startup that helps financial services bring great digital onboarding journeys to their end user without having to integrate multiple APIs, build a lot of AI tech themselves, and in a single one-stop no-code way, they are able to go live on their digital journeys. Today, we work with over 140 customers, and lovely to be in such a diverse panel today.
Great. Amit?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. My name is Amit Goel. I work at this company called Proof, which is a digital identity and authentication company headquartered in the US. But we are live in parts of Europe, Australia, Hong Kong, and a few other countries. What we have really focused on is that how can we use different attributes to do sort of authentication and digital identity, especially possession, reputation, and ownership of the phone. So it's a proprietary technology that has been developed and used along with a lot of other attributes. And we work with some of the largest banks and FIs in the US and other parts of the world.
Great. We have got a great panel here, and all of them come with different aspects of experience currently, as well as from where they were contributing in their previous roles, I would assume. Now, what I want to do right now is really to give a very quick high level of my sense or my thoughts around, we've been talking about how RegTech is transforming governance in financial service. So the key word being governance, right? So we need to set some kind of a, not exactly definition, but some kind of a boundaries around what we're going to talk about. So in my view, and I think, some people may agree, governance really represents a set of controls, systems, or mechanisms that basically enables organizations to operate in a, in a proper way, with proper supervision, proper people, proper processes that achieve the right outcome for the business, for all the rest of the stakeholders that is involved in that business operation, in a very long-winded way of defining governance. Yeah, so it involves a lot of things. And then following on from the previous panel that talks about, ESG, environment, social and governance, sustainability and all that. So I thought I'd bring out this concept here as well. And, maybe later on we can explore some of these too. Now, in the last 20 years, the concept of GRC, which a lot of us are very familiar with, governance, risk and compliance, and risk being one of the term of Una's company, it's been there for the last 20 years. Governance was in the previous term, GRC, and it still exists and still relevant. Now, in the next 20 years, perhaps, we're going to talk a lot more of ESG, and governance is also in the mix. So governance is something that I think within financial services or financial institutions or banks is something that you can't run away with, because you're dealing with people's money, you're dealing with people's trust, and therefore the governance aspect is actually the heart and center of the proper functioning of the financial institutions, as well as the financial industry at large, regardless of whichever country it is. Yeah. So the first question, right, is really to get a sense from all the panelists on a scale of 1 to 10. Right? How effective do you think is the current approach of governance in financial services? Just a quick answer, and and why. Maybe we can start with Amit.
Yeah, sure. I would basically give 5 out of 10, and the reasons, there are many reasons. I think after the global financial crisis, a lot of processes that were implemented, in a hurry were actually manual processes, and a lot of disparate systems have come up during this time. And so what we have seen as a resultant is that despite all these scrutiny and fines and all that, there's still many lapses. There are issues of conduct at large and small banks. So there's a lot to be done. I think we have to automate a lot of these processes, remove the clunky processes, and the regulatory environment is not simplifying, it's becoming more and more complex. So we're all hoping that with RegTech, we are able to solve some of these governance requirements by bringing automation to, assessing risk or enforcing policies.
Great. Una, what do you think?
It's actually a really good question. I personally don't feel that currently governance is done well at all. We always kind of say what isn't measured isn't managed. And when you look at governance from a high level, especially at board level, a lot of what we're seeing is basically statistical reporting on the key performance indicators across the company. The problem is that data can be corrupted. That data can be manipulative. And it's also just based on risks that we know. And going back exactly to what Amit has said there about enforcement action is showing us now time and time again that there are risks that we're not managing. And the reason we're not managing them is because we're basing our governance and our reporting on things that are known risks. And we're not really exploring or anticipating proactively new and emerging risks within our business or our products. So if you ask me how effective is current governance, given the fact that we are incredibly reliant on regulation to dictate for us how our control framework should be developed, as opposed to understanding the risks in our products, I would give it a 2 out of 10.
Wow. Okay, that's harsh. But that's okay. Otherwise, if everybody scores 10 out of 10, then we'll end this conversation straight away. Nelson.
Sure. Look, I think Amit and Una, I can't say I agree with them. It's a little harsher than what I would give. I think when we talk about governance, I don't think anyone can ever get a perfect score. And I don't think even the risk owners themselves would ever give themselves a 10 out of 10, because to have a perfect score, the world keeps changing, and you either need to have perfect prediction of the future, or you need to have a world locked in stasis. And I don't think either one of those are ever going to happen. And so it did occur to me that there is an international standard already for assessing at an individual institution level, how well they're doing in terms of governance. And I'm referring to the Camel rating system that a number of the audience will be familiar with, and it's also the same system being used here in Hong Kong. But a bank that has a Camel rating 1 is still going to benefit from improvement. It's still going to benefit from RegTech, because at the end of the day, RegTech is about using technology that makes your life easier as a risk and compliance professional, whether it's an internal or outsourced solution. It's about making things more efficient and effective, and taking that load off our risk and compliance staff and colleagues, etc. So I'll be honest, if I had to give a score, I'd probably give it a score of 8, and the score would be pretty much forever locked there, just because you're never going to get to 10. But I think we also have to recognize that we have a sound financial system here in Hong Kong. And we also still have to recognize that we should always be looking for things to make better. I have a strange professional background myself, where my first job was in the Australian government, in the Department of Defence. I did a lot of theatre work backstage when I was an undergraduate. And I've also spent a bit of time working for banks before coming to AWS. And I think the common thread, and then there's a reason why I'm pulling out these examples, we don't appreciate what goes right. We see what goes wrong. And, fair enough, when things go wrong, regulators take actions, fines are issued. But I think we also should give credit to where things are going well, and the hard work that's being done.
Yeah, I very much like your comment around nobody gets rewarded. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, for doing the right thing, and we get, it's the carrot and the stick thing, right? You tend to get the stick a lot once you breach the rule, but you don't get the carrot if you comply with the rule. Right? There's no incentive to comply better as compared to maybe the competitor. So okay, that's great perspective. Ankit, what do you think? Score out of 10.
I think I like to bring also a little bit user consumer perspective. I mean, if you were to ask consumers, according to them, I think banks are doing over governance, right? I mean, no consumer would say that my bank did less governance. Everyone, especially with the large banks, they feel banks just have too many processes. I think what's happening is that, to what Amit said, I think is 100% true. I think governance has been equated to process compliance. So as long as you're complying to certain processes, assumption is governance is good. But I think the way world is changing, the way technologies are changing, things are just moving too fast for process-based governance to, I think, move forward in the world. I think trying to also get ideas from other people in the panel, I think there has to be a more effective scoring mechanism for governance rather than just process compliance. Also, we should all understand that financial services is a business of risk. There's risk of fraud by the end customer. There's a risk of fraud by employees of the bank. It is a business of risk. It's not like any other business where fraud is a big problem. No, fraud is part of the business model in banking. So I think I 100% agree that these things will happen, and I think we have to reimagine governance from mere process compliance and then doing tick boxes to outcome-based governance, saying, okay, how much money laundering happened? Okay, what was the overall net score? Then rewarding and punishing.
So what is your score? The $1 million question. Would you score the current governance that you see in financial services as like Amit 5 out of 10, Una 2 out of 10, or you tend to want to reward, the good work that people have done so far, that you think that they are perhaps 7 or 8? What do you call it?
Yeah, I will give 5 because I think there is load on customer and not enough governance. So I think because of that negative customer experience, I'll give 5.
No problem. I think it's fair. It's an interesting perspective. So now moving on to another area and doing a little deeper dive in terms of regulatory compliance or the use cases of RegTech, for example. So regulatory compliance is a very broad area, and it's also quite a niche responsibility, right? Because it requires the organization. If you're a large bank or if you're a small, say FinTech or a small FI, you still have to comply with the same sets of regulation in general. Now, so it's broad and yet niche. And in banks and FIs, larger ones, we're kind of very familiar with this concept of 3 lines of defense, right? So first line being control mechanism or governance supervisions being placed at the front office. And the second line of defense meaning the control functions like compliance, risk functions, for example. And the third line of defense as internal audit, right? That comes in periodically to check that the processes are in place. So looking at these 3 lines of defense, how, in your opinion, how do you think RegTech can be utilized to strengthen each or some of them or all of these lines of defense? Perhaps hearing from ex-compliance officer Una, and currently the consultant. First, to hear that perspective, where your clients coming to you to ask for some advice, where do you think are the areas that they would want to beef up the governance part within the 3 different lines of defense?
I think first and foremost, the 3 lines model is fundamentally broken, and we're as an industry, we're all in agreement. So back in mid-2020, they actually removed the defense aspect of the model, because what has been seen is that has created silos. By separating up the first, second, and third lines, we've actually removed ownership and accountability of risk across the business. So back in 2020, we removed the defense word, so it's now the 3 lines model. But what we've seen since there is many regulators prefer to see a circular model, a holistic model surrounded by risk. The problem that we've had, and I like the fact that we've differences of opinions on today's call. I was quite surprised by some of the comments earlier about rewarding banks for creating processes. The problems that we have, and going back to the comment about consumers being negatively impacted, the reason for that is we have over-engineered controls within an inch of their life, and that shouldn't be rewarded. That's not a positive. What we have actually done is we've lost an understanding, as I said in my first response, of what our risks are within our organizations. And by creating these silos in risk management, we have further not just impacted that, but also to an extent lost the ability to understand holistically risk across the business. And also it has removed significantly individual accountability. So we're waiting to see whether the senior management regimes will have any impact on that. In terms of RegTech automation, the positive here is I believe we will begin to see more holistically the risks across the business and manage them better. But in order for this to work, we need an entire cultural shift to happen. And that is the bigger impact here. There has to be an entire mindset shift across the business to understand that we're all equally owning risk, as opposed to the current model of individual ownership across business lines. And then, of course, those gray areas getting dropped.
And that I agree, and that invariably will cause tension between the different departments. One being business centric, and the other one being control, and therefore they don't work with each other very well. I get that, and I think it makes perfect sense. But a lot of what you just said, Una, in my view, stems on people, the person, or the people running the business, right? So there's a lot of like what I would call it tone from the top, the culture, and the individual accountability and all that. And is that what I'm actually after is whether do you think technology, whether more specifically RegTech, can come into this push of senior managerial regime, accountability, as well as tone from the top culture, a mindset shift, to herd people towards that direction? Or is that something that is really human?
Do you really?
How is technology going to help?
do you really think a system's going to be able to change culture and mindsets? No, that cultural change has to happen with the implementation of the system, and there has to be an entire communication across the organization, both tone from top, tone from the bottom, and sideways, that this is basically our new approach to risk management. And as I mentioned, individual accountability. I don't believe that systems are the solution unless we fix the foundations. And unfortunately, I feel that we're all running, we're talking about RegTech, FinTech, AI, machine learning. This is all well and good. But before we can move to that next step, we need to basically fix the foundation before we build the house.
Yep, sure. Nelson, you have any views on this particular question? Because you've earlier on you mentioned that you've been involved in digital transformation projects and works like that. Do you have any views on what Una have just said?
Sure. Well, I'm not able to really comment about the different models that you might take, whether it's a circular model or a 3 lines of defense model. I'm not the right person to answer that question. What I can share is from my own experience of, from banking and from also working with different financial institutions today, is that top of mind, all the risk and compliance people, they really do need to deliver on 2 things. One is run the bank, and the other one is change the bank. I mean, you can boil it down to those 2 things. And so when it comes to run the bank, there are things that, it's a challenging world out there. The world keeps changing. New threats keep emerging. Consumer expectations keep growing. Regulators are, always supervising. That never stops. And so running the bank is something that they need to do in this complex environment. And at the same time, they also need to change the bank. And, part of that is a cultural element. Part of that is a process element. Part of that is a systems element. And so when it comes to run the bank and change the bank, one way of thinking about it is, some people like to call it a factory model and a studio model. So factory work is tied very much to run the bank and how do you run repeatable processes at scale? Because when we're talking about very large institutions, they need to be able to do things consistently time and time again. And one way of referring to that is factory work, because you're just doing, you want to be able to do a particular process well. The other type of work is studio work, and that's tied to changing the bank. So how do you design or redesign processes so that they're more efficient, they're more effective, and for all 3 lines of defense, if you want to take, stay with that model, RegTech has the potential to take away that factory work to make it easier so that there can be more focus on the studio work, the differentiated value add that can really leverage the education, training, experience of risk and compliance professionals. And so when it comes to studio work, what they can do is they can build RegTech into the designs so that the factory work will be faster and more effective. And in some cases, they can even rely on RegTech to take that work away completely. Automated compliance is something that we see with our customers. And when you can automate particular processes and remove those manual processes, all 3 lines of defense don't have as much work to do, and they can focus on, where they really need to make a difference. And of course, that's going to be different for each institution and each different function and each different risk.
Right. I wonder if Ankit has got a view on this, because you've also previously shared with me a model of how governance should actually operate and how the new age modern RegTech solutions should actually function across the entire organization. Do you want to add any comments on that, Ankit?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Una that, we are not in a physical world where you actually have a front office and a back office, right? That doesn't exist. I think modern RegTech solutions, and of course, I'm speaking from experience, I think what they are being able to do is that they start plugging in at the first time consumer touches you in front end of the apps, and starts making sure that you're complying and storing that data as it moves to the second level, where there's a back office person looking at data, maybe making some decisions, recording that, and then eventually storing it in a way that a regulator can supervise, or that data can go in certain formats to the end regulator. So I think some of these things that we are discussing, I think, thanks to software developers of this generation, they are actually being able to build them together in a single stack. And I think what RegTech players are being able to do is something that we were not able to do without software, is what Una was saying, is think holistically about risk. And so when you have a single software, which means you have a single database, you have every entry against that consumer from the time they entered to the time somebody gave a tick, which was the employee who allowed that to go through. So you have all that data. And I think that is now truly enabling what we have been visualizing, that there should be a holistic view of how you look at risk and how you look at RegTech compliance. So I think completely on page with Una here, that I think modern RegTech is bridging all these three. And anyone who's listening, right, bank people, I think they also need to stop thinking of this differentiated way. When they're choosing players, they need to insist that I want holistic approach. I want this consistency of capturing data, making it to the middle decision engine, compliance engine, and also having supervisory, not stay in this siloed world of saying, okay, I'll choose some of this and stuff like that.
Basically the source sorry, so basically the source of information coming from the front end or the client have to flow through the entire organization to the compliance who needs to do the checks, to the operation who need to record the trade or the transaction, and eventually to the regulator. So you don't have multiple sources of truth, and that's obviously a very good outcome. Now I'm just going to turn my attention to one of the a very important area within RegTech that I call it digital ID and authentication. And that has really gotten a lot of attention recently, as well as in the last several years, with Financial Action Task Force issuing guidelines or guidance papers on that. Regulators around the world have also come up, issued some papers around digital identity, non-face-to-face digital onboarding, and the like. So do you think digital identity is actually the holy grail for RegTech, or even the success of any FinTech, or digital economy in any country? Because why I'm bringing this up for discussion is really that if you want to transform governance, one crucial element of government is actually authenticated data, as well as the person who's actually seeking or performing transactions with the banks or the FIs. And therefore, if the upfront onboarding was done wrongly or authenticated wrongly, then it will have potential ramifications down the streams of all the data, and all the transactions may be pointing to the wrong source, for example. That's why I wanted to talk about this question. So Amit, what do you think of the importance of digital identity as well as authentication across the life cycle of customer journey?
Right. Not sure about Holy Grail, but certainly it's one of the most important areas, not to say that others are not. But what we usually say, there's a saying in financial services that in payments, if you remove authentication, it's just accounting, right? So signifies the importance of, what goes on to make sure that the person is authenticated. I think one of the reasons why this particular area gets a lot of attention and focus is because the pace of innovation amongst all the other segments of RegTech, and I guess the penetration at banks and financial institutions and the companies has been probably among the highest. And during COVID, actually, it has been growing astonishingly well, right? So I can give some examples, right? If you take a particular bank and one market, just in a single day, they might be doing millions of logins. And if you take like a bank which is say multi-market, they might be doing hundreds of millions of just the bank logins, every week. And so you want to make sure that all of those logins are authenticated, right? And because it's a very customer-facing front-end primary problem, therefore we see that the penetration of technology is probably at the highest. Again, Ankit can talk more about it, how biometrics and document verification is being used for digital onboarding. I can tell you from our experience that a lot of banks and FIs have adopted solutions to sort of allow customers to log into mobile banking apps in an authenticated way, even for payment transactions. even a password reset is not trivial. For banks, it has to be done in an authenticated way. So I believe that because it's very customer facing, and it's the first line of sort of, when you touch the customer, it's very important to strike that balance between security and convenience that Ankit was talking about earlier. And that's where a lot of great solutions have come up. And from our experience, we can tell you that customers are right now, especially during COVID, because people can't go to the branches and all that, everybody is sort of onboarding customers digitally, and the need for authenticating customers before they log into banking apps or do transactions has heightened. And that's why I think this has become a very, very sort of front and center RegTech technology in financial services.
Yep, sure. I think that's a good perspective. I mean, we can spend a day to talk about digital identity, and I think some parts of the digital identity that has already been talked about in the earlier segments of this forum. So I won't go into too much detail, but thanks, Amit, for sharing that perspective. Now I'm just going to move on. You brought up something about security. I thought it'd be good to expand on that with the other panelists here. Now, security and data privacy are of pretty high concern by financial institutions when they're working with any vendors, whether it's RegTech or even with FinTech or any, just general vendor that they work with, okay? So they're concerned about whether or not that apps itself may be hacked into, their customers' data gets stolen, and then they got into a lot of trouble. Now, and that has happened before, even with pretty large organizations. So one of those things is that most RegTech solutions, talk about RegTech, yeah? So RegTech solutions are typically offered on the cloud. Right, so it could be various clouds. We don't have to name any particular ones, or some of them may be able to be hosted on-prem or within the client's premise. Now, I'm turning to Nelson here, and maybe Una can give a bit of a consultancy perspective as well, because I understand that most FinTech or financial institutions are very concerned about this, one of their main concerns. So what do you think FIs, for people who are turning in and listening in here, what do you think FIs should be looking out for when using external RegTech solutions? Whether is it from a security, data privacy, how do you select, and how do you make sure that they ask the right question to the vendors? Nelson?
Sure. No, thanks for the question, Chagit. I think what is the most important thing to always recognize is what it is that the customer needs. And as an approach, that's, you work backwards from that. And so I highlight this because you need to look at the use cases or the specific scenarios where you're trying to solve a particular pain point. And it's a journey that customers go through in terms of using external RegTech solutions. And to be honest, they're already using them today, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, they're already using them. But the starting point is, pretty much consistently, they look at what are the low-cost, no-cost use cases where they can try something. There's a benefit to using RegTech for that use case, and the downside is minimal. And so a very popular starting point, for example, is grid computing. So grid computing is when you have clusters of servers on demand, and you can use them for if you need to do a lot of risk modeling. So with all the turmoil in the markets that we've seen in the past year, 2 years, when there's been fluctuations and unpredictability, you need to do a lot of different kinds of financial modeling, financial simulations to understand, well, what are the potential scenarios given certain parameters, given certain assumptions. And so, it makes perfect sense to put that, for example, on the cloud. And that's a very common starting point when adopting RegTech, because there really is no downside, and there's upside in doing so. And so, Standard Chartered, that's one of the very first RegTech solutions. If you want to call that RegTech, that's one of the very first solutions that they put on the cloud, and they've been doing that for a number of years now. And so another, low cost, no cost use case is arguably remote onboarding, where you're involving KYC and digital identity. So looking at HKMO's own website 12 out of 20 retail banks in Hong Kong offer remote onboarding. And then that doesn't even include the 8 virtual banks in Hong Kong that also offer remote onboarding. So, you know, out of the 28 banks in total there, 20 of them offer some kind of remote onboarding. And so, you know, there are proven solutions out there that are supervised by the regulator where the institutions and the regulator have confidence. And so this journey really is about building up your confidence and building up the muscles so that you can, you know, start from the low cost, no cost use cases and move forward and launch regulated workloads. So by regulated workloads, they're the ones that a bank would consider themselves the systems and processes that would be material to their business. And of course, each bank will decide for themselves which ones are material for them, and they're the ones they'll need to consult. They may need to consult with regulators on before they go ahead. But if you've built up your experience and your expertise and the muscle building, and you have your own playbooks from doing all these other use cases on the cloud or using RegTech, then you have a lot more confidence and a lot more experience when you go and launch these regulated workloads. And then you keep building up on that experience. And it's a flywheel where you can just get better and better. And so we have a number of customers where they've gone through that journey. Capital One in 2016, they shared at our conference how they started with just dev test, just dev environment and a test environment. And then fast forward to today, they've closed their last 3 data centers late last year. So you can really see how that journey has happened where, you know, no one starts with throwing everything on the cloud or everything in a RegTech solution externally right away. It's about building things up. And I think one of the key takeaways for the audience is the worst outcome might actually be not to explore the potential of RegTech. The HKMA themselves shared some very pointed messages at last year's HKIB conference about Hong Kong Institute of Bankers conference about strategic risk and the importance of exploring technologies to avoid medium-term business disruption. So, you know, it's good to learn and build up that experience, but certainly not doing anything at all is also a bad outcome when it comes to your own risk.
Yeah, agree. Una, very quickly, what would you advise your clients, or what do you see your clients having concerns around securities and data privacy?
From my perspective, it's all about cybersecurity. What we're seeing is 2/3 of data breaches are actually caused because of third-party vendors. And one of the things that we're incredibly conscious about with our clients when working with them is their focus on cybersecurity. And unfortunately, at times, what we're seeing is clients aren't willing to invest from a cybersecurity perspective up front. The truth is prevention is better than cure. Once your system gets held hostage or your client data gets held hostage, or indeed you haven't fully understood the system's parameters and data privacy breaches happen, you're going to have a much more serious problem on your hands. So I think what's really important here is very thorough due diligence and consultation up front on the RegTech solutions that you're going to use. And before you outsource any of your activities to a third-party RegTech provider, understand that their scope, where the data is being stored, what their cybersecurity looks like, and also as well, it goes back to the clients. A lot of the clients as well haven't necessarily focused on their own cybersecurity to date either, and that's where the other 1/3 of breaches come from.
Great. Now, I think we're coming to the end of this panel, and I'm just going to ask each panelist very quickly, because right at the beginning we talk about the scoring, 5 out of 10 for Amit, Una 2 out of 10, Nelson 8 out of 10, and Kit 5 out of 10. And gazing into the crystal ball that you may have in front of you, what's your prediction of RegTech adoption in the next, say, 3 years, for example? And do you think that very quickly, just a couple of words, do you think that your ranking today, and if you go into the future, 3 years from now, will it be better? Let's go with Amit first.
Yeah, we, in my previous firm, I was the founder of Medici, and we actually wrote a report with Ernst & Young on RegTech. It was an EY Medici report, and we collected a lot of data. And I think one of the data points from Bloomberg and our own analyst was that by 2025, the RegTech market is going to be around $55 billion. So that is one number, I think, if you were looking for that. The other thing I would say is that we are seeing that banks, whether big or small, and financial institutions are actually partnering with a lot of RegTech companies all over the world. There are more than 1,000 plus RegTech companies, and also there are people in the middle, such as Oracle, Finacle, Temenos, who are setting up marketplaces to enable that. I'm assuming VRS and specialized consulting firms are also helping in that. So I think the adoption is increasing, and
Okay.
we hope that technology can make it cheaper, better, faster for everyone, and for the adoption.
Yeah. Sorry, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't cut you off because I need to move to the other panelists on the conclusion on this particular gazing into crystal ball. Ankit.
Yeah, sorry, I'm very optimistic. I think governments and RegTech players and banks pushed by fintechs are totally going to change the experience, and we would see a very much Google, Netflix like experience. So I would assume we'll go to 9 to 10.
Great. Nelson?
Sure. Look, I have a great story I'd love to share with you if I had time about Triscuit, the US cracker, but they'll have to look me up offline if you want to hear the story. Short version is, personally, I want to see RegTech disappear. And I say that because it is true that risk and compliance needs to be embedded into everyone's mindset. And on the business side, what we're also seeing is that technology and business are coming together. And there is no longer a separation between them in many organizations, particularly ones that have gone through their digital transformation journey. And so what I'd personally love to see is RegTech disappear, because technology is just part and parcel of what we do day to day. It shouldn't be an afterthought or a bolt-in or an add-on. It's just part of how you do business. We don't talk about electric powered factories. We don't talk about electrical powered banks anymore. That's just a given that they're going to be using electricity. And so absolutely no reason why technology isn't a fundamental part of every business.
Got it. Last but not least, Una, 30 seconds.
Very quick.
To wrap up.
85% of your processes should be automated, and the remaining 15% should have a human focus on it to focus on key risks. 5 key problems: 1, legacy systems; 2, competencies and capabilities to manage the new system implementation; 3, is it the right system for you? Be very careful in your choice. 5, mentality and culture. Are we really understanding what we're bringing in and the oversight responsibility? And most importantly, overcoming third-party risk, which we've already discussed.
Excellent. Thank you very much for all the insightful thoughts of the panelists, and thank you for your attention. Have a great event, everyone.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, Jacket. Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nelson.